Hi, today we want to look into how to integrate APIs and any REST API inside of Toddle. Now, you may ask yourself the question, what is an API? An API is a public integration for any service or for any server, right? So there are APIs like OpenAI. They have an API that makes their servers, their service accessible using an application programming interface, short API. So APIs itself don't really have functionality. They are the gateway to functionality for a service or even for your own server. So when you actually call the OpenAI API, that API is the server that takes your request, processes it on their backend, processes it on their server in their business logic, and then it will return to you the result. It will return to you what you ordered. Now, that's, the general overview what an API is doing. Now, APIs are also something that you can build yourself so that Toddle can communicate with your database. If you have a database in the secure NoCode backend Xano, you would need to build an API for Toddle to communicate with your backend because there is no direct way how Toddle can communicate with a database unless you have an API on your backend. Today, I want to show you how you can connect that API, but first of all, how you can build your own API. Knowing how to build your own API can come in handy, especially if you want to build a service where other people are using your API that is monetized, like ChatGPT, right? Or like Jasper AI, or like whatever, like all those other AI APIs at 11 Labs, right? You could build something like that in Toddle and Xano. But let's get started with the basics. So first of all, we need our server that is doing things. So let's create that. Let's go to Xano, the secure no-code backend. By the way, I'm not affiliated with Xano. Like, I have an affiliate code with them. I never posted it in here. So, and they don't pay me anything. Like, I got this month $32 from Xano. So I'm just talking so highly of them because I really like their service. So I create an API inside of Xano using the API panel. And now I missed it. I created this basics group. I got too many. Okay, we got this basics API group. In here, it's like a folder. I can create a custom endpoint, and I have get and post. Now you may ask yourself, what's the difference, get, post? We don't need really the other ones. We just need get and post. Now, what is post? What is get? Get is if you want to get data. Let's make a get call real quick. Let's call that get. Let's save that. And now we just create a server here, and we can create. And this is the thing that only Xano has, this function stack. That's the logic that you run on the backend. So this is the API, and this is just getting and receiving data, right? Where you can receive data. You can see what's called, you can have it respond with something. This function stack, though, with variables, other tools don't have that, right? Supabase doesn't have it. You would have to look into tools like BuildShip, like FastGen, and they're rather expensive as they are cloud compute, and Xano is server-based, instance-based. Xano is really strong at the function stack. That's really what you pay for with Xano. Let's create a variable real quick, and let's say this was server-side rendered, because the get APIs can be server-side rendered in Toddle. Rendered. Here you go. Actually, that will be the value of our variable, and the variable will be called response as an example, right? I'm going to save that. We're going to update preferences. Now we see the response of that API is also our response variable. So when this API loads, it's going to return with this was server-side rendered. Let's publish that API. And now we have this URL. When I open this in my browser, you're going to see that it is going to respond with this was server-side rendered. Now I can integrate this inside of Toddle, right? I can click outside of the editor. I can go to APIs. And then I want to make sure that auto fetch is on. If auto fetch is on, this API will be server-side rendered and will have an SEO benefit. I'll put my URL in here, and I'll call that get as an example. And now, as you can see, I got this was server-side rendered, and now I can simply go in here, add a heading, double click in the heading, go on FX, go on get, data, and I'm going to have my data in here. So now when I open that page, we see we got that in here, server-side rendered, and Toddle is constructing our HTML page from the data that came from the server. So that's what we got in here. It's very cool. Now, we can also pass on dynamic parameters inside of our get call, right? So I could, for example, pass on a username. Let's add user_name as an example, as an input inside of our API. And then we could go in here and say, hey, user. So we always do curly braces and then caps user, and then we can do comma, right? This is how we make tokenized text. I would then copy this text, save, add a filter of replace. I'll search for user, and the replacement will be the input of username. So I can make those things dynamic. Let's publish that. So now when I run this with hey NoCode Procode and run that again, I says, hey NoCode Procode, this was server-side rendered. So now I got this input of user_name. So inside of Toddle, I can go in here and add a query. Because it is a get call, we don't have a body. So we add a query parameter. We add user_name. It needs to be written like the API receives it. And then we can hard code that name, for example, as NoCode Procode. Hey, NoCode Procode, this was server-side rendered. As you can see in here, when I open that page, we're now making that API call with data that was passed from Toddle to the API, and the API responded with that data that we passed on and with the manipulations it did on top of that data. So that's what we can do with get calls on a high level. So we could also create a variable called username, right? And that would be NoCode Procode. And we can also write it out so we see it's a different NoCode Procode, right? I would go to my API and I can go to my query. I can go on FX, and this is how I can make those values dynamic. I can bind it to a variable. So then, as you can see, hey nocodeprocode.com. Let's open that in here. And we can see, hey nocodeprocode.com, this was server-side rendered. That's how we get data. But what is if our front end needs to send data from the front end to the back end? Because right now it goes from the back end to the front end. But what if we need to send data? The way we send data is we use a post call. For that, we need to first create a post call inside of Xano. So let's go to our basics in here. Let's add an API endpoint. Let's add a custom endpoint. There will be a post, and let's make that called post. Let's save that post call. And in here, I add an input, and let's post a name as an example. Let's post name in here. Or let's actually add email. We'll put an email in here, right? So we got an email. We'll add a function, and I add my, I don't have my resend function in here. This is the wrong database. So how about we do something different? So we can add an email in here, right? A little bit of cool logic. Hey at nocodeprocode.com, right? And then I can add a function in Xano to create a variable called username. And I'm going to add email. I'm going to add a filter of split, and I'm going to split it by the @ as an example. Let's save that. Let's update preferences. Under here, I'm going to add a stop and debug so I can see what I'm doing. Let's return that username. So now, as we can see, I got an array of hey at nocodeprocode.com. I just want to extract the username nocodeprocode.com, or the provider as an example, as my username. So in this example here, I would, let's actually call that provider. That would be my email provider. In here, update preferences, right? Provider. I would then actually take the last filter. So we add last in here. So then I got nocodeprocode.com. And then I say I want to remove the .com, so I add another filter of split. And I'm going to split this by the period, right? And then I'm going to reload. Then I got NoCode ProCode, com. And then I'm going to add another filter of first from an array in Xano. And that's how I got NoCodeProCode.com, right? That's how I get the provider as an example. And then I can just have that return. And that is a post call, right? When we send, now it is pretty much similar, right? It has an input, it has an output. But you could make those things in a GET request. But generally speaking, for best practices, you should not do that. So you should use GET request. You can always misuse the APIs, right? You should do GET request when you are getting data, when data is already on that backend and it's being served there. And you can add some dynamic things like user ID, so it helps you get the proper part of that data, right? And usually GET requests have very short API logic, like maybe a loop, maybe a query all records, right? Post requests can make post requests. In this example, would then make different API calls and they would do all that stuff. I'm not saying that a GET request cannot have an external API call. Certainly there are use cases. But generally speaking, when data comes from the backend to the front end, let's just leave out dynamic parameters. Those are, you can add those. But when data comes from backend to front end, GET, because the front end is getting the data from the backend. And if the front end is receiving new data, right, and needs to create new data, we're going to use a post for that. So that's just the best practices. So we got that post here, and we add an email, and we get that back, right? Let's publish that. And let's copy that endpoint URL. And now let's create a new API in Toddle called post. We'll make that the type is post. And now we have auto fetch off because, it's not a GET. We'll paste that in here. And now we have queries. We can still use queries, but we can also use the body. So we can go on FX, we can go in here, and we need to create an object in here, and an object will need to have email. So this object will need to be built to receive those inputs. So it's like a form. If we have email, we would add like name in here and so on, but we just have email. So we add that object of email, and then, I would need to add an email in here. So how about we create a variable of email? Or actually, let's do email in here. We'll clear that, and we'll add a form in here inside of Toddle. Let's add a form. Now in that form, we're going to add an input. Let's make that input nice. Let's make that input background color gray 50 and text color gray 700, right? I go in here, I'll bind it to that email variable. So when I type in hey at NoCodeProCode.com, just like that, as you can see, I got my email in here. So then I can go on that form, I can add a button, I can make that button in here, let's say submit, right? So I got my submit button in here. Let's actually go on that div, let's give it some space. Let's make it 1 rem. I got my submit button in here. And then I go not on button click, I go on form, I go on events, I go on form, submit. I have prevent default, so it's not reloading the page. And then I'm calling my post API, right? So I click in here. This is how I set that variable, right? So now I go to my post API, and I want to make sure that that value of that body is linked to the variable, right? So I'm sending that data to the backend. So now, when I click on here on submit, as you can see, we got that response from that API. So then when I go on that form in here, I can add a text, for example, a text in here that will show the response of the API. So I can map this to the post API in here, and then I'll get the response of the API. So if that is, instead of NoCodeProCode.com, ncpc.com, I submit. And as you can see, I get that new response from the API sent back. So post request receive new data, create that data, and then respond with something. You can also have it respond just with success if it doesn't have any relevancy, but most of the cases you're going to respond with data that already was stored on the backend, right? You don't want to respond with data and then have the backend call your backend again to create something. No. Post API, ideally, if you have user accounts, should take the data, store it in the database after it was created, and then respond with a copy of relevant information from that record that was generated to the front end. So that's just like the principles of how they work, how you can work with post and get requests inside of Toddle, how you can integrate APIs now, and generally you should always have an eye out for API security. I made a video about that, and I would highly suggest you to look at that video because it could save you a lot of money, especially if you work with AI APIs, and a lot of headache. And if you want to become even a better Toddle developer, or you just need a kickstart to get started, I would highly suggest you to look into NoCodeProCode.com. It's the best place to build and learn faster and better inside of Toddle and Xano. And, we got a lot of we got dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of courses on Toddle and Xano. We got a whole component library to help you build things faster and, navigate across real edge cases inspired by real people in the community, in the membership. We got boilerplates for Toddle and Xano to help you build your first app way faster, secure, with step-by-step courses so you understand what's behind everything that is in that template. We got daily office hours from Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. PDT, to help you across your roadblocks that you may face when you set up the templates, right? And then we got pre-made Xano snippets to help you, become a database developer and to be better at backend and to have a more secure and robust backend. And then we got exclusive tutorials, to help you navigate across some of the edge cases that really happen if you push the boundaries of what's possible. And there are no limitations with Toddle, especially if you are a NoCode ProCode member, because we always have solutions for everything. And here's a sneak peek. We got the tokens template. It's like the most comprehensive Toddle template ever built. It includes over 20 hours of courses, step by step on how everything was set up, how you can set it up yourself, so you understand, what motivated the template being built the way it was built. It handles cancellations. It handles subscriptions. It's fully tax compliant because it uses lemon squeezy. People can buy more credits. There are spend caps. There are spend limits. People can spend more credits than they have purchased. If not, they will have to create and buy more credits, right? And those things. We have webhooks for the payment providers, so you only give them access after they really paid. There is a multi-plan feature management system, a billing portal where people can manage their subscription. They can downgrade and upgrade their plans without having an infinite money glitch of having the token balance reset. There are strict calculations. There are endpoints like this pre-built for you to make sure that the moment you start building your idea, building your SaaS, it works robust and stable. And if you want to make customizations, it's fully customizable. It's in a very sleek ChatCN UI, so you can customize and style it to your liking. And if you want to change something, that's why we got office hours. So if you're concerned about, if I do this, how does this work with security? You can ask that question and we can look at it together to help you make sure that if you do this change, it's not compromising other things that, and keeping your security high of your app that you're building in Toddle. And we got dozens and dozens of other cool, exciting tutorials, courses, everything on that membership side. Every video is about an hour or over an hour, some are 3 hours, right? So you got all those great resources here to just help you build amazing stuff inside of Toddle, build it faster, build it better. And I would love to see you on the inside, right? We got a bunch of stuff in here. And if you want to join, go to NoCodeProCode.com. The link is also in the video description and in the pinned comment. And I would love to see you on the inside. Just make your application video today and you'll be in there in a snap. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.